Hello and welcome to the CivilTalk Podcast. I'm your host, Tapasio Althouse. If you're new to the show, this is where we explore civility and social emotional learning with esteemed guests, expert insights, and practical advice to help people navigate the world. Today, I'm truly honored to welcome Mike Robbins to the show. Mike is a leading expert in leadership, culture, and teamwork, and for more than 2 decades, he's helped some of the world's most respected organizations create environments where people don't just perform well, they feel safe, valued, and genuinely connected. Mike is the author of 5 best-selling books, including Bring Your Whole Self to Work and We're All in This Together, which explore how authenticity, trust, and emotional intelligence can transform the way we lead, collaborate, and create cultures where people and performances truly thrive. His insights have been featured in Harvard Business Review, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and on NPR and ABC News. Before all of this, Mike played baseball at Stanford University and professionally with the Kansas City Royals. And although injuries ended his athletic career early, the lessons he learned about mindset, resilience, and teamwork continue to shape his philosophy on leadership and life today. Mike is also the host of the popular podcast, We're All in This Together, with nearly 450 episodes, and he's delivered 3 TED Talks with close to 2.5 million views. Mike, welcome to the podcast. We're excited to have you today.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Yeah. So take us back to the beginning. What originally drew you into leadership and culture work, and what were you noticing in organizations at that time?
Well, for me, it really started with baseball, actually. I mean, that was, you mentioned in my intro, that was my life. I grew up here in the San Francisco Bay Area where I still live and, played baseball as a kid and got drafted out of high school by the Yankees, didn't sign because I got a chance to play at Stanford, and then got to play professionally with the Kansas City Royals organization after that. And then I got injured. I was a pitcher and I hurt my arm when I was still in the minor leagues, which was super devastating to me personally. And, 3 surgeries, and then I was forced to retire. But I had become fascinated by, I love the game, but I also was fascinated by both kind of the individual sort of mindset approach of, it wasn't always the most talented players that seemed to be the most successful. But then with the same thing with on a team level, it was like, it wasn't always like when I was on teams when all the players were really good, if we didn't sort of have the right mix or our relationships weren't quite right, or we didn't really like each other, root for each other, trust each other, or the coach was kind of a jerk or whatever, it would like, we called it chemistry. And I thought that was a sports thing. And then after baseball, I moved back home. It's the late 90s, sort of internet boom time here in San Francisco, Silicon Valley area. And I get my first job. And I'm still kind of reeling personally from the whole like, oh, wait, I'm not an athlete anymore. But right away, I realized, all that intangible stuff that I was fascinated by as an athlete has nothing to do with athletics and sports. It's just a human thing. So then I just started getting really curious in like group and team dynamics and relationships and leadership. And with the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, I lost my job. And I had a mentor say, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I was like, well, I would study that and see if I could do that for a living. I don't even know what that is, but that's what I'm interested in. So That's what kind of got me on the path 25 years ago. And I
That's
haven't
interesting
really
that you didn't, while you're speaking, I'm like, man, if that happened to me, what would I do? And I feel like I'm a big sports person too. And I feel like I would naturally move to coaching because I would still want to be a part of the team and I would still want to be a part of the sport. So it's really interesting that you took all that insight not into coaching, but into teams and organizations inside the corporate world,
Yeah, and it evolved because I did think about coaching or broadcasting, but there was something. I felt really heartbroken when my career ended, and the thought of not being able to play and make it myself. When I thought about, some of my friends went into coaching or became. I have, a couple friends that became sports agents and other around the game, around sports, which I love, and I'm grateful that these days some of our clients are some of the major league teams, and it's fun to be tangentially connected, to the sports world. But for me, I just felt like for my own kind of healing and grief, I needed to pull away from it. And I didn't really think that I would get into doing this.
Mm-hmm.
But after working for a couple of years and really not any idea of what I wanted to do, I realized, I am fascinated by how teams and humans operate. And again, 25 years ago, like there wasn't a lot of conversation about emotional intelligence or social and emotional learning or mental health. There's so many things that we talk about now that were personal journeys and experiences of mine. And I was trying to figure out, how can I talk about some of these things in a way that makes sense and resonates with people. And I've been grateful to just see the world evolve over the last 2.5 decades to where, you and I are having this conversation on a podcast where, there weren't any podcasts 25 years ago. And the idea that we could be having a whole conversation and there's people out there interested just makes me really happy.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about one of your books, Bring Your Whole Self to Work? You mentioned sort of the inspiration that has abounded to write something like that, but can you just talk to our listeners a little about the book and just walk us through that?
Yeah, well, that book, that's my fourth book, and it came out back in 2018. And so my work, a lot of the work that I do inside of organizations, I get brought in to speak and to work with teams and leaders. And a core pillar of my work has to do with authenticity. Like, how do we show up authentically? How do we build authentic relationships? And about 10 years ago, this phrase was kind of a buzz phrase around Silicon Valley, bring your whole self to work. The idea being like, hey, let's create environments where people don't feel like they have to hide. They have to leave pieces of themselves outside of work, whether that's their identity or whether that's their passions or whether that's some of their fears and doubts and insecurities. Or nowadays we would talk more even about, all kinds of aspects of just neurodivergence and just ways of operating, mental health, different things. It's like, can we be more human at work? And again, it almost seems quaint now because, of course, most of us understand, well, that's important. And this younger generation coming up sort of expects that, which is great. But for a lot of the time that I really started doing my work 25 years ago, and even as it evolved, and even sometimes still today, this notion of like, can we be human at work? Can we bring more of who we are, and integrate it? And I think, look, I mean, I wrote that book even before the pandemic, but I do think that as challenging as COVID was on so many levels, I think it added a whole nother layer to us of like, wait a minute, we all live in places with dogs and cats and babies and things. And you know what I mean? We were sort of zooming into everybody's homes and realizing like, yeah, people have full, messy lives and we can still show up at work and we don't have to pretend like we have it all together.
Right. You mentioned about being human. Can you talk more a little bit about that? And what does being human mean to you? And why is it important to sort of bring that into the workspace? And what does that look like?
Well, I mean, to me, it's just, like from the time I was a kid, growing up in the 80s and going to school, I would sit in the back, and I was a pretty good student, but like I'd be sitting in trigonometry class my junior year in high school, and I'd be thinking to myself, what the hell does this have to do with my life? You know what I mean? And this is with all respect to math and science, and I wasn't a math science kid, but I'm like, when am I going to use the Pythagorean theorem? Or, again, I'd be learning about, ancient Roman history or something, which again, interesting, but like not super relevant. To me, I was raised by a single mom. My parents got divorced. My dad had bipolar disorder. We didn't have a lot of money. I felt insecure. I wanted to ask someone out and see if they'd go to the prom with me. And all these things are going on in my head. And I'm like, how come nobody's talking about that? Am I crazy? Or, and I was a good athlete, but like I would be out on the baseball field and I felt a lot of stress and I felt a lot of pressure. And like when I got to college, here I am at Stanford, playing college baseball at a really high level at this great university, this great program. And I got really depressed. And this is 1995. And nobody's talking about mental health in those days, especially not for male athletes. So I say all of that to like, that was part of like my story.
Right.
And I think that, again, we live in a world nowadays, in many cases for better, in some weird cases, sometimes for worse, where like people share a lot, right? Whether it's on social media or just in life in general. So this idea of sharing more about ourselves was more of a foreign concept, particularly at work for many generations. And now we're sort of navigating through a time and a space where it's like, okay, well, what does it actually mean to really be human in an authentic way? Can we bring more of our humanity? And the world as it is, the country as it is, pretty messy. pretty divided. There's a lot going on. So there's also, look, it can be complicated when people start showing up and talking about their thoughts and their feelings and their political ideologies and their religion and what's going on. And it's like, oh, whoa, so it's been interesting to kind of watch all that. But I'm a big believer of like, the more you can bring your humanity as a leader within teams, within any kind of work that we're doing at schools, the better it's going to be for everyone, the healthier it's going to be. And we also have to be mindful of that in the way that we do it.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you say, and this is sparking, some thoughts in my brain, is that one needs to take ownership of bringing themselves to work in a way that allows vulnerability and allows themselves to be human. Yeah. And I think that sometimes people get a little disoriented because the spaces aren't really primed for you to be vulnerable. Yeah. And can you speak to those people who have that urge to bring that vulnerability and to not be on guard by maybe sometimes a pretty sterile environment? Because that's sort of the feelings that I have in the past gotten into. So how can people break through from that problem?
Well, look, and it is a risk. I mean, when I wrote Bring Your Whole Self to Work several years back, I remember, I'm traveling around the country. I'm speaking at, all different types of events for businesses and universities and in the healthcare world, and people would come up to me and say to me to some degree, like, hey man, easy for you to say, like, right, you're white, you're male, you're straight, you have all these privileges. Like, it's, you can't really bring your whole self to work if you look like me, or you have this job, or you're this age, or this race, or this, Yeah. And my response was like, okay, first of all, I hear you completely. And second of all, I'm not saying this is easy. And it's clearly easier for some of us than others, depending on the space that we're in, the environment that we're in. Every environment, there are dominant people and positions of power. What are people wanting and expecting in that space, and who are the most listened to voices? And if you don't look like those folks, or you don't have that same background or whatever, again, it's in education. It's like higher education. It's like, oh, someone has a PhD, or someone's a tenured professor in a tech company. It's like, oh, the engineer who's like built the product, or, in a fashion design company, it's like the creatives, the people who are making the clothes, whatever it is, right? Again, in healthcare, the people who are the physicians. We're going to have positional power. We're also going to have sort of background. It could be identity power. So it definitely is, I could say the same thing that you say in a meeting, and it might be perceived differently based on our gender, based on our experience level, based on our age, based on our background. Maybe I've been there for a long time and you just started, or vice versa, or whatever. So all that to say, not to minimize any of that, but we do need to be mindful of the fact that it is challenging for a bunch of different reasons. Right. And it's and even people who find themselves with a lot of positional privilege or power, it's challenging in that space as well, because it's like we've all had this happen where it's like, oh, I'm the new kid on the block. No one listens to me. But then I've been there for a while, and now I'm expected to know stuff. And so then it's hard to like say, I don't know how that works, or I'm not sure, or I screwed up. So it can be challenging for different reasons. So much of this is about ownership, and it's also about self-awareness.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, you're talking about putting yourself out there. And I've thought of the times where I've put myself out there vulnerably in places maybe where it was a little taboo to do that. Yep. But again, like, I am a woman, I'm a white woman, so I have privilege, but I'm a woman, there's all these different factors. Not every time, but more often than not, I've had someone come up to me and just say, thank you for doing that. Yeah. And I think that if you can just do that, this speaks to your other book, We're All in This Together. Yeah. I think that can create a sort of shift in mindset. And it just takes sort of one voice to do that trust fall. And I know this might sound a little hokey, but the gods that might be, the universe, I think rewards bravery. And it rewards sort of putting your neck out there and just being like, well, vulnerability is really brave and it's really tough. This softness is very tough. But I think if you put yourself out there, whether it be, hey, I'm not okay with this, or hey, I'm feeling this way, or hey, I need support. Yeah. And doing that in an environment where maybe even other people are witnessing you. Yeah. I think about that too. And I think about, do I feel brave enough to have other people witness my struggle? Right. And I think that's an important factor as well.
For sure. One of the things in my work and in both the books that you mentioned of mine there, Bring Yourself to Work and We're All in This Together, I talk about this idea of what authenticity really is. And I talk about the authenticity equation. And so the authenticity equation is honesty minus self-righteousness plus vulnerability. So for us to show up authentically, we got to be willing to be honest, which takes some courage in and of itself. But removing our self-righteousness is removing the arrogance that says, just because I think it, just because I feel strongly about it, makes it the truth. Look, sometimes in life, there's a correct answer and an incorrect answer. 99.9% of the time, that's not the case. There's your perspective and my perspective. There's your opinion and my opinion. They may be similar. They may be very different. So self-righteousness is, and look, we're swimming in a sea of self-righteousness throughout our society. And it's hard for us to see our own self-righteousness, because when you and I are being self-righteous, when most of us are being self-righteous, we don't think we're being self-righteous. We just think we're right.
Yeah.
And so, again, I'm not saying water down our opinions. I'm not saying don't speak up. I'm not saying don't take a stand for things, but just there's a difference between self-righteousness, which is I'm right and you're wrong. And if you disagree with me, now we are fundamentally opposed to one another, versus conviction. And it's subtle, but it's significant. Conviction is, I believe this to be true. I'm willing to speak up about it. I may feel really strongly, really passionate. I may be willing to debate and really argue with you about it, but I have enough humility and enough self-awareness to realize a couple of things. First of all, I might be wrong, because sometimes we're wrong. Like sometimes we're convinced we're right, and then we realize upon further reflection, oops, I was wrong, or we change, or we evolve, or right? It's like, what did Maya Angelou say? When you know better, you do better, right? But maybe it's not a right-wrong thing. Conviction is about acknowledging maybe there's another way to look at this thing that I can't currently see, which is always true, because all of us, no matter how open-minded we try to be, all of us are biased, not in necessarily a detrimental way or in some kind of malicious way. We're biased based on our own experience. I can only know what the world looks like through my eyes. Right. Almost 52 years of walking around the planet being this dude. That's all I got. And I've learned a lot, and I've gotten a lot of feedback, and I've tried to grow and evolve and change, and I try to be empathetic and understanding, but like, I'm going to see the world the way I'm going to see the world. And that's not inherently wrong, but it is inherently biased. And so when we can remove the righteousness, because the natural human response to self-righteousness is defensiveness. We often we're trying to give people feedback. We're trying to talk about important things. We're trying to coach people. We're trying to even educate people, inspire people. And we don't realize they're getting defensive with us. And it's not 100% just because we're being self-righteous. There's other reasons why people get defensive, but oftentimes that's what's eliciting it. Even when it's like, wait, I know I'm right, or I know this is important. I know this person really needs to learn this or hear this. Why aren't they listening to me? Well, because we're being self-righteous. I mean, again, look at the country, look at the world right now. It's very difficult to talk about sensitive issues that we disagree with people on, whether it's on social media or whether it's inside of organizations or whether it's just in our own families, because we jump to that, I'm right, and if you don't agree with me, you're wrong, and like, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And it's dangerous.
Yeah, I think that, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking like a huge word that's popping up in my head, when I've had conversations with people and we have met a wall because of this self-righteousness or because of wrong versus right. And I think a big barrier, a question that should come before this is, what are your values?
Right.
Because if your values are being right and you seeing things my way and you adhering to my way of looking at the world and my perspective, you're going to run into defensiveness.
Yeah.
You're just going to walk right into it,
Yeah.
I think that an important discussion that people should have before even having these conversations are, what are your values? What do you want to achieve from this conversation before we step into it? Because I'm not going to waste my energy and my time debating.
Right.
So much debate and there's so much divisiveness. And I think that it's really important to figure out whether or not you're going to add to the chatter of that, or if your value is, I want to grow and expand and be curious and I'm flexible and I'm adaptable.
Yeah. Well, and I love I was on a Zoom call earlier this morning speaking to a group, and someone in the chat said that thing, those 3 questions we can ask ourselves: is it kind? Is it true? Is it helpful? And I do think that's a good thing to think about before we're about to say something or write something or share something. And to your point, look, the reality is, I mean, I teach this stuff, I talk about it. There are certain topics or certain issues for me. It's very difficult for me to have an open mind about certain things. I
Yeah.
would love to, I want to, I understand in theory, yes, there's different ways to, but like, and sometimes from a place of self-awareness, I might enter into a conversation with someone and say to them, listen, I'm not open-minded about this. Like, I've thought about this a lot. I have very strong opinions about this. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to shut you down, but it's not really going to be useful for us to even debate it, because you know what I mean? Like, and most of us have some of those things. Hopefully it's not like everything in our lives, but we have some of those things that, like, I'm not, a mentor of mine likes to say to me, Mike, if you're trying to prove it, you don't believe it. And so again, removing self-righteousness doesn't mean that we're somehow watering things down, like whatever, everybody can think what they want, it's okay. It's like, no, I can feel really strongly about stuff. But notice when I step over that line, that arrogant line at times of self-righteousness, it just shuts down conversation. So, it's hard to have civil talk and civil conversation with people if we're like, this is right, everything else is wrong. The thing, though, that we got to address as well, and you talked about this earlier, the other part of the authenticity equation is adding vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I like to think of vulnerability is, well, first of all, I love Brene Brown's definition of vulnerability. She says that vulnerability is risk, emotional exposure, and uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
Risk, emotional exposure, and uncertainty. There's literally nothing I can think of that matters to me personally or professionally, a relationship, a team, a project, a goal, big or small, that doesn't require one, two, or all three of those things if it matters.
Right.
And to that point, like you were talking about putting yourself out there, it is risky, right? When we speak up, when we say, I don't like this, or I agree with this, or I don't agree with this, or I want this, or that doesn't work for me, or I'm confused, or all the different things, it's risky, right? People could judge us, people could shut us down, people could use it against us, like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We try something new.
Yeah.
And we could make a mistake. We could fall on our face. We could, right? I mean, and uncertainty, like we're living through such an intense time of uncertainty right now for the last, so long. These last 6 years, like since the beginning of the pandemic, especially, but just like, it feels like every day something new is happening. Something's changing. Technology is changing. The world's changing. My wife and I look at each other, and we're both in our 50s now. And we'll say sometimes, can it just be 1985 for like a week? I just feel like I need to catch my breath and slow everything down, because it's like fast, right?
No, I know. It's kind of scary. I was actually thinking of that the other day too, because I was doom scrolling and I was like, oh, my brain hurts. And I remember I was just like, I didn't have this issue. I was born in 89. I was like, I didn't have this issue growing
Right.
up. Like
you and Taylor Swift, 1989, right? But think about, but it's like, yeah. So when you were growing up in the 90s, sometimes my dad died in 2001, and I have these every now and again. I'll think about my dad, and I'll think, if my dad came back to life right now, and I were to explain to him what's been happening in the world the last 25 years, or I handed him my iPhone,
oh my God.
his mind would explode. He'd be like, what is that? Right? Or even my dad was in radio, and like if I tried to explain to him a podcast, even,
Right.
I'd be like, Dad, like I have my own radio show, but it's not really a radio show. It's like I recorded it at my house, in my office, and then people listen to it on this little device anywhere in the world, and whenever they want to. He would be like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? It's just like, and so again, things are moving quickly, and it's okay, I think, sometimes, regardless of our age, to just say like, oh, it's fast, it's a lot. And that goes into the emotional exposure, is like, what I call that is lowering the waterline on the iceberg. And that's where we can say to ourselves, and potentially to others if we're willing to, like, how we're actually feeling. Because feelings are not only, they're personal, but they're universal. So when we lower the waterline on the iceberg, if I meet another human, different age, different race, different gender, different background, different, all these things on paper, above the waterline, we might look like we're very different. We start lowering the waterline on the iceberg, and I start sharing with this person, or they start sharing with me what they're really feeling.
Yeah.
Joy, pain, gratitude, sadness, excitement, fear, whatever, fill in the blank. It's like, all of a sudden we become way more similar, because it's like, oh, you feel like that? I feel like that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And so again, it's not that we have to walk around sort of telling everybody all the different things that are going on for us mentally and emotionally, but if we can share a little more of our humanity with each other, we start, because the natural human response to vulnerability is empathy. And like one simple example I use, like, when you're stuck in traffic, if you're stuck in traffic and you're in your car and you don't want to let someone merge in, what do? you don't look at them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not trying to be mean, but you're like, no, because the moment you look over there at this person you've never met before, you're never going to see again, unless they're screaming at you and flipping you off, you're going to let them in, right? Because you have that moment, they look at you like, please, and you're like, okay, and you let them in because you know what it's like to be over there when you can't get in.
Yeah.
It's vulnerable, right? It's frustrating. You feel helpless. And then, okay, go ahead. And they go, and hopefully they give you a wave, and you give them a wave, and you have, right? That's that moment of human interaction, that human, vulnerability and empathy. And it's like, we all do that all the time.
Well, I'm in LA, so I don't get that as much.
But you need it, right? You really need it.
They do look, or I will say I am someone who allows like people to merge, but like, even if I do, there are moments where I look at someone, I'm like, please. And they're just like, brr. They look at me and there's just no empathy. That's just LA.
But usually, you're right. I mean, but usually if you do look over, hopefully they have that moment of like.
LA is a different, I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, LA is just the, oh gosh, the worst motorists in the world who completely leave their empathy at home and go out, and it is dog eat dog.
Yes.
But I hear you. I think it's interesting. You're talking about, obviously empathy. And we had another a wonderful woman on the podcast in the past, and what she's saying is ringing in my head, because you mentioned right now how sometimes it's really hard to be empathetic towards another person's opinion, especially if it's something incredibly divisive and totally goes against your morals and your values. And how do you reach humanity in those moments? And her answer to that was always respond, or not always, but respond in a way with how. How did you get to that place in your mind? Not why, but how. And I always thought that simple question was so powerful, because it eventually goes back to what you're talking about, which is it always comes down to a feeling. If you go how 3 or 4 times, it'll eventually come to, because I felt a certain way.
Yeah.
And it'll always come back to a feeling. And that feeling will always, by and large, be relatable.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty powerful, is to get down to the feeling. It's hard. I think it's really hard. And I think discussions like these are really important, so people can understand that in our own sort of microcosms of worlds, everyone's sort of dealing with that and trying to, navigate those difficult discussions in a way that creates more humanity.
Totally. I love that how, because that is like, it's a curiosity, right? The question, like how, just being curious without judgment, just wanting to know how someone arrived, especially if they've arrived at something very different. In their world, it made complete sense. And part of our job, if we want to connect with them and we want to understand, is just to be curious.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, non-judgmental. And again, we can sit here and say that, but performing it is extremely difficult. And that's kind of why I do podcasts like these, is because I think when you're in those moments, it's so easy to feel isolated. Yeah. It's so easy to feel angry, and it's so easy to lash out. It's so easy to feel misinterpreted, and like the world is stacked against you, especially for like really sensitive people and people who want to make changes.
Yeah.
And I think having discussions like this, especially over a podcast, is really important. Podcasts are easily digestible, and totally. You can listen to it, and every once in a while a thought or an idea or a statement will perk your ears up. And I think it's important to have these discussions and let people know they're not alone in that journey, and people around the world are making those brave decisions to not judge, to hold the line and ask people how, in a non-judgmental way. And there are communities who are there to support you, and that,
For sure. Well, and I think about, as we're talking about this and thinking about civil talk and having conversations, a mentor of mine years ago said to me, Mike, what stands between you and the kind of relationships you really want to have with people? I said, what's that? He said, it's usually a 10-minute sweaty palm conversation you're too afraid to have.
Yeah.
He said, if you get good at those 10-minute sweaty palm conversations, you'll have fantastic relationships. You'll build trust. You'll resolve conflicts. You'll get to know people who are different than you.
Mm-hmm.
You'll find common ground. You'll give feedback. You'll get feedback. He said, but if you do like most of us and you avoid those conversations because they can be awkward or uncomfortable, or sometimes they get messy or they take longer than 10 minutes. And he goes, but just if you lean into those conversations. And, when he said it to me, I remember thinking that it was true. And all these years later, as I reflect back on having that conversation with him, it's true. And look, I don't love having those sweaty palm conversations. They're not my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
But what I have learned over the years through my work and also just through my personal experience is like, if I can go into those conversations with some intention that I want to connect, even if I feel scared or I'm feeling upset or whatever, protective, but if I can lower the waterline on the iceberg first. And I usually start almost every sweaty palm conversation I have with some version of, I don't really want to have this conversation, or I've been avoiding talking to you about this, or I'm feeling scared that you might get upset or whatever. I'm not trying to like do some kind of Jedi mind trick on them. I'm trying to genuinely let them know vulnerably, I want to talk to you about this and I'm feeling scared, or I've been avoiding talking to you about this because this feels sensitive or tense or whatever. Because what I know, again, the natural human response to vulnerability is empathy. And like, even if they're upset with me, even if we see it really differently, even if we haven't been communicating the way we want to, or there's some hurt feelings, I know they know what it feels like to be scared to have a conversation.
Yeah.
So that's the common ground I want to start with.
Yeah.
And from there, it doesn't mean the conversation is magically going to go perfectly and we're going to end up hugging it out and it's all worked out necessarily. We might still agree to disagree. We might still not work through the thing we got to work through. But usually addressing it from that place is going to be way more effective than either avoiding it or simply trying to win an argument from that self-righteous place.
Yeah. No, that's true. I think that, it's funny because I approach those conversations in a way where, depending on the person, I guess, where I'm just like, I've been waiting for a moment like this so we can get closer, and I think that everyone navigates them differently. And, but you're right. The important part is to really just have the conversation, even if you don't want to do it. And I think that, leaving the conversation, having tough conversations is what builds relationships, If it was dandy and breezy all the time, you would just be stagnant. And unless you want to stay that way, which there are many people who want to stay stagnant and are hyper allergic to growth. We're aware of that, but then those aren't your people. And you move either to another romantic relationship or another company too.
Right.
That's another place where you can talk about what is bothering you, hopefully in an organization, and they can meet you where you're willing to be, where you're willing to go as well.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about your podcast, because you have one as well. And you've have a lot of conversations with people on your show. We're on this together. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that and how hosting has shaped your opinions on things.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I've had the show for almost 10 years now, which is a while. And, when I first started, when we first started, in the past, I had a couple podcasts years ago and then internet radio shows. And I started this particular show when I was working on Bring Your Whole Self to Work. So the show was originally called Bring Your Whole Self to Work. And the idea was I was interviewing people as I was working on the book to just capture stories and ideas and perspectives from different thought leaders and, corporate leaders and just people like, how do you bring your whole self to work? And, and then I had a lot of great interviews and conversations and got a lot of insights. And then I wrote the book and the book came out, but I wasn't quite done with the conversation. So we kept it going. And then I was working on We're All in This Together. And I was like, well, I'll just change the name of the show and keep it going with the same premise that like, I want to talk to people about teamwork and collaboration and how we find common ground. And so, that's, we've almost 450 episodes, as you mentioned, a lot of great interviews and conversations. A lot of times now I'll get on and won't have a guest, but I'll just share some of like what I'm hearing, what I'm learning, what I'm grappling with as I'm out in the world, traveling around the country and, even to some other countries around the world. And just what are people talking about? What are people struggling with? What are some of the insights that I'm hearing and learning from some of the teams and people and leaders that I work with, as well as some of my own journey? Because I do find like, if I'm struggling with something, I know not everybody's just like me, but just to your point, sometimes when you speak up and say, this is bothering me, or this is confusing, or this is hard, there's usually a bunch of other people going, yeah, me too. Thanks for saying that out loud. Like, I've learned enough over the years. One of my favorite sayings is the more personal, the more universal. So like, even when I'm out speaking, like if I tell a personal story, I'm not doing it simply to just, let me tell you about me, I'm so interesting. But like the more real and vulnerable I can be about my own personal experience, I tend to find that that resonates with people more than just kind of talking in generalities.
Yeah. What are some common themes? We have on the CivilTalk podcast, we have, I think you're our 43rd podcast
Okay.
person. So your number 450 is just like, wow.
Yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. It's a lot of time. You mentioned 10 years, and that's just a lot of time to gather information and to notice patterns.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear from your expert insight, because it really is 450 is just enough hours to qualify you as an expert on, what sort of patterns you are noticing when people are talking about their work and their own personal lives. And more importantly, not only talking about that, but offering maybe some solutions to those too.
Yeah. I mean, I think that what I've learned through the podcast, but also just through my work, and especially in this last decade, is, and I mean this, and I think there's a lot of fear. I think there's a lot of disconnection. I think there's a lot of confusion, frustration that exists in the world. Like you were talking about doom scrolling and that kind of thing. Like, I think we're aware that like, wow, there's a lot of stuff happening. There's a lot coming at us. And I don't say that in some woe is me or woe is us or isn't it terrible kind of way. But I think that a lot of people that I talk to in different environments are aware of the fact that like, it's a pretty intense, challenging collective time. And there seems to be this desire to connect. As simple as that sounds. Like I had a coffee meeting yesterday with somebody who I know professionally, and we were both just laughing about the fact that we love all the technology that we have. We're so grateful for Zoom and Teams and all the ways, and we don't have to always just get up and get dressed and go to things. Isn't that great? But there's something that happens when we do get together that doesn't happen when we don't. And like, my book, We're All in This Together, came out right as we were getting into the pandemic. And to me, as painful and challenging as the time of COVID was, it made me realize how much I love being around people, even if sometimes I need to retreat and be by myself, even sometimes if people get on my nerves or, we're all different where we fall on the continuum of sort of extrovert versus introvert. I do think there's just this sense of common humanity that exists out there. And I also think, for what it's worth, not to get into any of the politics of it, but I travel around the country and around the world in lots of different environments that are very politically conservative or politically liberal. I think collectively people are concerned about the level of polarization and divisiveness wherever they fall on the political spectrum. They might have different stories as to who's the cause and what's driving it. But I think at the end of the day, there's something innately in us, not just as Americans, but as humans, where we're like, wait a minute, I think we are in this together. I think we do sort of belong to each other and we want to. And I also think, for what it's worth, that's part of why I think podcasts have become so big over the last decade, is that with all of the short form everything and the quick this and quick that and fast this and text message and DM, and we want to have longer, deeper conversations and connections with each other. So one of the things that I recommend to people all the time, as much as possible, is like, go meet people in person, go for walks, like sit in face to face when you can. It doesn't always happen, and we're working the way we are and we have to work hybridly and remotely. I get it, but like, get together when possible, because there's something that happens when we're in each other's space that doesn't happen when we're not.
Yeah, I think that, thank you for sharing that. I think that I have felt the same way as well, wherein I'm like, what do I need to do? Like, I know doom scrolling is bad for me.
Right.
It's fun and it's like eating chocolate cake.
Right.
But, you can't eat chocolate cake forever. And I'm getting to a point in my life too where I was also really bad at canceling last minute on my friends.
Mm.
And that was just like a bad habit of mine because I'd make a plan. And then when it came down to it, I was just like tired, And I got to a point in my life where I was like, I'm just going to have to show up tired.
Yeah.
And it's going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But there is no way you can get out of these doom scrolling sort of patterns if you don't make yourself uncomfortable
Yeah.
and or inconvenient,
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge lesson that I have taken over the past too. And it's like going to the gym. I don't want to go to the gym. Do I want to feel the benefits of the gym? Yeah, I do.
And that is a great example. I mean, look, I think we got to be careful to not overdo it, and like exercise addiction is a real thing. That said, very rarely, whether it's going to the gym or doing yoga or going for a walk or a run or something physical, very rarely do we regret it once we do it.
Totally.
Right. Now, oftentimes we don't want to do it. It doesn't feel like it. I'd rather just sit in bed. I'd rather just scroll on my phone. I'd rather just watch Netflix or whatever. Same thing with going out and being with people. In fact, that friend, colleague of mine that I got together with yesterday, we were texting each other in the morning, like, are you still up for it? Are you still up for it? Like, both were it was like, does one of us want to bail, right? But we showed up and we laughed and we just went and met at a Pete's Coffee. It wasn't that big of a deal, but just going there, it was such a wonderful reminder of how important it is, because I left and I felt like, I'm so glad I got up and took a shower and put on a pair of pants and went and met with her, as opposed to we could have done that meeting on Zoom and it would have saved her a drive and me. But there's something valuable. And look, we all have busy lives. We do have to discern and make decisions about things on where we put our attention. But I do think there's something like when we can put our phones down, when we can one of the things I do every morning, and I'm fortunate, we have a backyard here at our house where there's some nice grass. I walk outside in my bare feet on the grass in the morning. Mm-hmm. It's just part of my morning ritual, even when it's really cold and early in the morning. But it's something that like puts me in touch with the earth. And I just kind of, look at the sky and take a moment to just try to be present. Mm-hmm. Because my life, like a lot of people's lives, gets going and things are moving and shaking and happening. And I got this meeting and that call and this interview and I love what I do. But sometimes I can forget, like, oh, I'm human and I'm on this planet and like, it's important to connect,
Yeah. I think it's also important to, you're talking about that. And I kind of do the same thing in my backyard too, where I'll just sit in the sun for a little bit because the sun just makes me, I'm SoCal girl and the sun just makes me feel great. But, I also have a tendency to also go on Instagram too. And I'm just like, she's getting into lizard brain mode. And I think it's important to understand that you have so many distractions around you and it's so hard to pick the thing that is probably the most boring, but also the most beneficial, and I think it's really important to stay strong in those moments. And especially when, during COVID, that it really rewired our brains, and to undo that rewiring is very tough, but it's a choice.
Right.
And
yes. It is a choice. And there's an active nature to it. It's funny as you're saying that our daughters are now, our older daughter, Samantha's almost 20. She's a sophomore in college. And our younger daughter, Rosie's 17. She's a junior in high school. And I remember when they were little, I remember reading this thing and they were talking about play and the importance of play with kids. And this was, our girls were born in 06 and 08. Like I often say, sometimes when I'm in my lowest moments and I get frustrated and I'll hold up my phone and I'll look at Michelle, my wife, and I'll say, these didn't exist. Like we didn't have smartphones until 2009. So both our girls were born. And I think like I was on Facebook and Twitter a little bit, but I had no idea the way the world would evolve and what social media would look like and Instagram and TikTok, all of it. Right.
Right.
But that said, I read this thing and they talked about getting very simple passive toys for the girls when they were little, because they would say passive toy, active child, active toy, passive child. So meaning if you put a thing in front of a little kid that was, a screen and it was doing lots of things and it was lighting up and then the kid could just watch it and be like, wow, like, but if you gave them a very boring toy, a little truck, a little car, a little doll, a little thing that they had to interact with and do something with and move around and dress or throw or whatever, like a ball or right, whatever it was. It was like, oh, the toy is pretty passive. So
Mm-hmm.
the child has to be. And then I think about that again. I was thinking about child development in our girls and wanting their brains developing and all that. But I think about myself sometimes, and it's like my phone, like our phones are so active. There's so much happening. I get to sit there for hours at a time and just scroll or listen or watch or whatever. And look, I'm saying this as most people are listening or watching us on a phone, but what can we do that's more active? When I'm sitting on vacation by the pool, I notice a difference when I read a physical book versus when I read off my phone or off a tablet or something. And I get that the tablet's way more efficient to pack because then there's a bunch of books and a bunch of things on it versus sticking a bunch of books in my suitcase. Yeah. But there's something about the tactile physical book that like slows my brain down, slows my nervous system down, and it feels really nourishing. Whereas if I read off the screen, I notice at the end of it, I don't feel that same level of calm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think about that space of silence and how important massaging your imagination is. And I've done a thing where recently I'm starting to, with the new year, incorporate new things that are addressing what you're talking about in my life as well. And one of them is when you go to a cafe, just sit there and don't go on your phone. Just leave your head up. You're not some sort of like hunched over Quasimodo.
Right.
Like work on your spine, like tech neck is a thing and I don't need that in my life.
Yep.
Work on your posture and just observe, like the art of observation and where does that lead you? And I always find my imagination takes over. I have imaginary conversations in my head, or I'm like, oh, I should do this when I get back home. And it's just the ability to massage your imagination and your thinking, I think is just really important. And again, we have so many distractions. When you go to a cafe, sometimes I notice just everyone on their phones and I'm just like, how have we gotten here? How has this everyone is looking down, every single person.
When I visit my daughter in college and we walk around campus and, she goes to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. It's a beautiful campus. It's a beautiful place. But I notice when we walk into and they have all these great places where the kids can eat. When you walk into the dining area, it's not that loud.
Yeah.
Because most of the kids, they're on their phones, they have their AirPods in, they're on their computers. I mean, they're studying. Again, like when I was in college, you walked into the dining hall, it was super loud because all we could do was eat and talk to each other. Mm-hmm. And it just, again, and I say this, like, that's the world that we live in. When I'm in the airport now, it's like, nobody's really talking to each other. We're all on our phones. We're all just, and again, I'm not saying this in some holier than thou, but it's like,
exactly.
There's opportunities for us to connect. And you talk about CivilTalk, we talk about social emotional learning and awareness and like connecting with other human beings, sitting down on an airplane and introducing ourselves to the person next to us, as awkward and old school as that is. Maybe they want to talk, maybe they don't, but like, I've had some incredible conversations on airplanes over the years. They happen less frequently than they used to these days.
Yeah.
Or in taxi cabs or places like that, or in coffee shops, like your point,
Mm-hmm.
We can do that. We don't have to. It doesn't make us better humans if we do that versus not, but there is some value in doing that.
Yeah.
And I think it does have us flex different muscles, if you will, internally. And it's something that we can all try if we want to.
Yeah. I mean, I think about opportunities too. I don't know I really love Fran Lebowitz.
Yeah.
She is just so funny. And she talks about this a lot too. And she is so anti-digital age. And she's just so old school rebellion. And I love her. I don't know if it was her or someone else, but she was like, if you're walking around and you are just on your phone walking and your head's down, you could have just missed the love of your life walk by. Totally. And you just didn't even notice it because your head was down, or you could have missed a conversation with your future boss or a coworker or a best friend. And I think about that too, as like me putting my head up is an act of opportunity, of an invitation. There are moments I'm more of a, when I'm in an airplane, like, don't bother me because I feel so incredibly trapped, but if I'm like walking around or I'm at a cafe or whatever, I try to keep my head up, and as an invitation, as like, it's also hard to meet people and make new friends as you get older.
Right.
And so it's just like you have to sort of put yourself out there and do that.
Yeah.
And the importance of practicing that practice, for lack of a better term, I think is really important.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to one of the last questions. Where are we on time? Just want to make sure. Okay, we are good. What do you do? Wrapping up with one of our last questions, what do you do to come back and center yourself? I know you mentioned you go outside and you walk on the grass. What do you do to center yourself? What sort of mindful practice do you make to center yourself amidst everything else that's going on?
Yeah, I mean, the walking on the grass in the morning is one of them. I mean, I've had a meditation practice for, 30 years now. So that's super important to me. Similarly, journaling. So meditating and journaling are so fundamental to me. And as I've gotten older, I mean, I do like to exercise, but I find like walking and sometimes leaving my phone when I'm walking, just to like be out and hear nature and hear my heart beating and my breath moving and my body moving, like those things, as well as my wife, Michelle, and I, finding time where we can really connect with each other. And evolving it. Like one little thing we've done in the last couple of years that's really helped us, because we're very different. We've been together for 25 years. We communicate very differently. My wife gets annoyed with me sometimes because I talk a lot. She talks less. And sometimes, so we actually voice text back and forth. And we've actually found that the asynchronous communication is a way to utilize the technology in a way that Michelle really likes being able to voice text to me, because she says, I can't ask questions or interrupt her. So she gets a full thought out but we actually find that in the mornings, sometimes we'll go on walks separately, and in the evenings we'll go on walks together, but we'll voice text to each other and share some of what's going on. And it's been this new, interesting, creative way to actually connect while utilizing technology. So again, it's not all bad with our phones, right? I mean, people are listening to you and I because of this. I also like to listen to podcasts. That's actually really helpful. And I actually much prefer audio versus video.
Okay. Me too. What are your favorite podcasts?
My favorite podcasts, let's see. I really like Mel Robbins' podcast. I really like Armchair Expert. I'm currently listening to a great new podcast called The Midlife Chrysalis. My friend Chip Conley started something called the Modern Elder Academy, and his podcast is fantastic.
Okay.
I sometimes will listen to Bill Simmons because I'm a big sports and pop culture guy. So those
I'm writing this down, and once you said sports, I was like, oh no.
Yes, I also love. I'm friends with Glennon Doyle and her wife Abby and her sister Amanda. So I love We Can Do Hard Things. So those are some of the shows that are kind of in my rotation. Also, I'll listen to Oprah's podcast. I was listening to that this morning.
Oh, okay.
So those are some of the ones that I like.
I gotta listen to her. I find that I move towards like the comedic ones. I love like Smartless.
Yes,
and that's a really good one with Bateman, and
they're great. I love Conan O'Brien's podcast. That one makes me laugh too. So
yeah. I need some levity every once in a while with like a good comedian.
Totally.
Listen to those, but yeah, I want to thank you so much for being here. We're wrapping up, and if you have anything that you want to mention to our listeners, where they can follow you, where they can get your books, let us know.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate the conversation. Thanks for having me on. The best place to connect with me and my work, whether it's books or social or my podcast, is at our website, which is mike-robbins.com.
Great. Thank you so much for this conversation. Again, I really appreciate you being here and your insight. You were so thoughtful, and I'm sure I'll be thinking about this conversation and listening to it for more insights. So I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you. And for those listening, I highly recommend, again, exploring Mike's books, which we have talked about today, Bring Your Whole Self to Work and We're All in This Together, as well as his podcast, We're All in This Together. He has obviously over 450 episodes, so you have so much to listen to. So we really hope you dive into that. All of his work will also be available on civiltalk.com. We will put links on this page, so make sure to click on through to that. And as always, feel free to share this episode with someone you think would find it helpful. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.